public pension board, you have to imagine yourself surrounded by a band of attorneys interpreting fiduciary law and saying what you can and can't do, or if you can and can't do from the strategy standpoint. So there are a lot of forces at work, I'd say, to keep you in the middle and not necessarily pursue new ideas. And as a treasurer, he was always pushing at the edges, always hard at the edges. But what was incredible was it was just not a platform for change or a platform for looking at different things. And Anne was on staff then, but they always came prepared. It was not just making arguments for why don't we think about this or do this. They had done extensive research, really thought through the fiduciary implications. And really for those of us that have tried to move our organizations forward, having that type of board leadership, it made such an enormous difference for CalSTRS, and I know for CalPERS as well. So all of the 850,000 teachers of California applaud you today as well for what you've done. So let's start our panel, if we could. And this is entitled Investment Strategies for a Low Carbon Future. Not a very exciting title, we have to admit. So we're not going to lecture you on how to generate alpha today or anything like that. We hope to make this a truly interesting discussion around some tough areas. So first off, let me introduce our speakers with me. On my far left is a gentleman some of you may recognize and know, Bill McKibben, who is president and co-founder of 350.org. Author of many books, over a dozen books, beginning with The End of Nature in 1989, which is regarded as the first book for a general audience on climate change. He's founder of the Grassroots Climate Campaign. How many of you have been to the website 350.org? Let's just kind of take a look. That feels good. You raise your hand too, David?
Yeah. On Twitter, though, just so you know.
Well, there you go. There's a vote. Okay. He, which has now coordinated over 15,000 rallies in 189 countries global since 2009. Time magazine called him the planet's best green journalist, and the Boston Globe said in 2010 he was probably the country's most important environmentalist. So wonderful to have you today for this important discussion. David Ludd is the co-founder and senior partner of Generation Investment Management. He previously spent 18 years in the big house, Goldman Sachs, including serving as ex-CEO and CEO of Goldman Sachs Asset Management from 1999 to 2003. He's on the board of Harvest Power, New Forest, Social Finance UK, and Social Finance US, and the Nature Conservancy, among other boards. Written any books? I didn't ask you about that. No books? Just like that. But I will tell you, I'll get off script. CalSTRS, we're one of the earlier institutional investors in David's firm in Generation Investment Management. We now have about $410 million invested with this manager. And I have to tell you, their investment performance over 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, the term of our investment is well above our benchmarks for performance. So it's been a very successful acquisition. And he'll share some of the magic chemistry with you here in a few minutes. So why we have this topic, a couple of reasons, or should be obvious, but clearly all the things we think about here at Ceres around risk, around climate change, resource scarcity, population growth, energy demand, ensuring the human rights of workers across global supply chain, and access to fresh waters. We talk about a list of compelling global issues that intersect with the economy, that intersect with business being able to perform. And then on the investor side, you need to get inside our head as well and recognize we just left a recession that for many of the institutional investors represented losses of 25 to 35% of their portfolios. So though those numbers have come back, we've lost years of appreciation of these portfolios. But we've also left with a traumatic experience around risk and a yearning, I think, to look at risk differently in these portfolios. So it is an important intersection where you see investors really trying to say, do we understand this that well? Do we really know how to manage risk in our portfolios? And then we have these dramatic physical risks affecting the planet. So that's kind of framing what we're going to talk about. So Bill, if I could start with you, you do this so well. You've been a thought leader on climate science, policy matters now for decades. Set the stage for the audience for our conversation. What's happening in the planet now? What do you see happening 10, 20, 50 years from now?
Sure.
Take some time.
Sure. And let me just start, if I could, just by saying what a pleasure to be here. And, you know, over the years, I've known all the folks at Ceres, Mindy, Chris Fox, and people and just admired their work enormously. And I was really glad that Phil mentioned the person that I knew first at Ceres, Bob Massey, who really brought me into this world. I think Bob's here someplace today, probably because I think he's going to speak a little later on. And I think he wouldn't mind me speaking out of school and saying one of the things he's been doing in the last little while is helping us a lot, working with students and others around the country who have formed the vanguard of this divestment movement. I think he may have talked with some of those 11 students who occupied the president's office at the Rhode Island School of Design for 36 hours earlier this week and won their commitment to take a serious look at divestment. And I think the reason is for his shift, and certainly for a lot of our shifts, is nothing more than the kind of physical metrics you described. You know, the scale and pace of solutions are dictated by the scale and the pace of problems. And if we had 100 years to solve the problem that we were in, there'd be one set of solutions that would make sense, and they'd be slow and gradual and easy and inexpensive and everything else. And that'd be nice. Unfortunately, the physics of the situation isn't giving us that time. We just got a few weeks ago the new cryosat data on what's going on in the frozen portions of the Earth's surface, and it showed that we've lost now 80% of the summer sea ice in the Arctic that was there 40 years ago. In essence, we've taken one of the 5 or 6 largest physical features on Earth and we've broken it. The other ones are not far behind. The beautiful Pacific out the window is 30% more acidic than it was 40 years ago because the chemistry of seawater changes as it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. On land, the essential point to remember for the future is warm air holds more water vapor than cold. The atmosphere is 5% wetter. This loads the dice for drought and flood. And everybody, especially that sector of the economy that we ask to recognize or understand risk for us, the insurance industry, are now sounding every alert they can think of to underline the fact that things like drought and flood are going off the charts. To answer your question about what we expect going forward, that's what happens with 1 degree of temperature change. That's how 1 degree Celsius is how much we have raised the temperature so far. The same scientists who told us that would happen tell us that before the century is out, unless we get off coal and gas and oil far more quickly than any government currently plans, that 1 degree will be 4 or 5 degrees. And if that happens, there is no reason to think that our civilizations can begin to cope with it. The agronomists at Stanford and the University of Washington published a study 2 years ago now showing that from this point on, each degree increase in global average temperature should cut grain yields about 10%. Easy to see how that could happen when you watched what happened in the Midwest last summer and now the drought. Everybody here is good at math. Just try and figure out in your head what our planet looks like, how it works, if the temperature goes up 2 or 3 degrees and the number of calories on the planet therefore goes down 20 or 30%. Just try to figure out that this is by far the biggest thing that human beings have ever done. We have taken, in the lifetime of everybody in this room, we have taken the Earth out of the Holocene, out of this 10,000-year period of benign climatic stability that underwrote the rise of human civilization. We're now into something different that we don't really have a name for yet. The only question is how far into it we're going to go and how much damage we're going to cause. And the answer to that question, and I think is the reason we're here, it's entirely dependent on what kind of political will we can muster. And I think what that means at this point, and I'll end here because it kind of is a prelude to the conversation, I think at this point that basically means, can we break the power of the fossil fuel industry to continue determining what our future looks like? Because if we can't, then that 4 or 5 degrees is a given.
You know, as I looked over some of the interviews you've done in the panels around this discussion, those who would push back or have criticism have argued, I think, that landing you described is still speculative. Could we actually make those dramatic changes based on that projection?
The outcome, the physical outcome, how much the temperature is going to go up is speculative? Yeah, I mean, sure. I guess we won't know it until we see it. But, I mean, think about the bets we make based on far less solid information than this all the time. Mm-hmm. And people in this room make them, every single day. I mean, this is, all one can tell you is this is what science has given us based on A, the largest computer models we've ever assembled, B, on the deep past experiences we look at what's happened on the Earth in the past one, and C, at this point, on lived experience. You don't need to be all you need to do is hold up a picture of the Earth as it looked when Neil Armstrong was up on the moon 40 years ago, and a picture now. They look completely different. It's sort of the opposite of what happened to me. There's a lot less white up on top, than there was 40 years ago. Stick a pH strip in the ocean, it comes out a different color than it did 40 years ago.
It'd be interesting, I think, since you've thought longer and harder about this than probably anyone here in the building. You wrote that seminal work 24 years ago. Mm-hmm. How has your thinking changed in that 24 years? Has it just been a matter of getting more data that validates the trajectory that or can you talk about the detours you've made and how you see this problem?
And in fact, some of the most important have come in the last couple of years.
Okay.
To some degree, my story was, when I wrote The End of Nature, I was 27. My theory of change was people will read my book and then they'll change. And they did read the book. It was a bestseller in 24 languages or something, but that's not how change works. I think I continued to assume that change would work as a result of kind of reason. It's true year after year. Our best scientists and economists have all gone up to Capitol Hill and said, well, this is the worst thing that ever happened. We've got to internalize externalities and put a price on carbon. The engineers have demonstrated in places like Germany that it's entirely possible to use renewables at a large scale, on. But nothing ever happened. And at a certain point, about 5 or 6 years ago, it became clear to me that we needed movements, that the financial power of the fossil fuel industry was so great that it stymied any real effort at change at an appropriate scale. And so we started building movements, and we've done it now. But the most important, in a way, intellectual development, at least in the last few years, was, came last year when the people at Carbon Tracker, and I think James Lee was here,
he did a presentation
talking earlier
yesterday for us,
put out these numbers. I wrote a piece, it was a good report, but it didn't get quite as much attention as it should. So I wrote a piece about it for Rolling Stone. For those of you who keep your back issues, it's the one with Justin Bieber. But the strange thing was to get
that's a good issue to be in.
The strange thing was to get a call from the editor the next day. And he said, this is weird, but your piece has 10 times as many likes on Facebook as Justin Bieber's. And the reason part of the reason is my, soulful stare, of course, but the real reason was that those numbers are so powerful. They rewrote my understanding, in a sense, of this story. I knew the first 2 of the 3 numbers, okay? 2 degrees is the only thing that the world's agreed on about climate change. The fiasco at Copenhagen yielded one number, a global agreement from everybody, including the US, that we wouldn't let temperature rise go past 2 degrees. Since 1 degree melted the Arctic, we're fools to go to 2, but we're going to. I mean, even if we do everything right, we're going to get very close at this point. Second number, roughly 565 gigatons, billion tons of carbon. That's how much the scientists have been telling us that we can burn and have some hope of staying below. Since that number's a year old now, it's closer to 530 gigatons. At the rate we're burning it, it'll be about 14 years before we blow past. That's a bad number, but I wanted to sense that. The third number, the new one, the really terrifying one, was, they did the trouble of adding up all the SEC filings and annual reports and stuff and figured out that the fossil fuel industry and the countries that operate like fossil fuel companies, think Venezuela, have in their reserves 2,800 gigatons of fossil fuel. Okay, they have 5 times as much as the most conservative government on earth thinks we can burn, but clearly we're going to burn it. I mean, that's what their business plan is, right? That's, and so anybody, 2 things then I think naturally follow. One is one's understanding of those companies shifts. They become rogue companies. Outlaw, not against the laws of the state, they often get to write those, but outlaw against the laws of physics, which is a bad thing to be outlaw against. Unless there's no room for doubt or speculation or wishful thinking. I mean, Exxon alone has 7% of the carbon in its reserves necessary to take us past 2 degrees. One company, one board of directors, 7% of what it would take to tank the planet. I mean, that's astonishing. Second thing that becomes clear when you think about that, the danger is not just that they have all the carbon and they're rogue industry for that reason, but they're become incredibly adept at making sure that our political system never changes. Chevron, I think, made the largest single campaign contribution in the post-Citizens United era, designed to make sure that nothing ever changed. Third thing that becomes clear, if you hold these companies, okay, if you invest in them, the bet that you're making is that nothing will ever change. Okay? HSBC and Citigroup in the last couple of months have each done big reports saying, if we took that 2-degree target at all seriously, if we did any of the things that we would need to do to try and meet it, the valuation of these companies would drop in half. Okay? So if you hold them, your bet is that nothing will happen, and you're a participant in the bet because you're helping, fund the political operation that makes sure nothing ever happens. Hence the rise of this divestment campaign.
We'll come back to that
Yes,
one.